and I'm a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. My guest today is Coleman Ruiz. Coleman Ruiz is a former Tier 1 Navy SEAL special operator. I think it's fair to assume that most of you have never heard of Coleman Ruiz before. And in fact, it was part of his former life job description to be largely covert, such that only his family and friends really knew what he did for a living. He is, however, now living as a civilian. And the reason I invited Coleman on this podcast was essentially to tell us his life story, which of course includes his time in the SEAL teams, but includes so much more that I'm certain is of value to everyone. Today, Coleman shares with you his remarkable journey from childhood through his teenage years into the military and some of the things that happened during his time in the military, which then informed his post-military civilian life, and what it is to be a father, a husband, and somebody who has experienced tremendous loss at various stages of his life, as well as tremendous triumph. Indeed, if ever there was a life that could be framed within the context of the so-called hero's journey, it is the life of Coleman Ruiz. Coleman Ruiz's life is one that embodies focus and pursuit, family and friends and love, all the things that we think of in terms of having a rich life, but also one that includes many unforeseen tragedies, many unforeseen challenges, both internal and external. Coleman also shares with a rare and extraordinary degree of vulnerability the extent to which challenges in life, both external and internal, have helped shape him as a human being. What follows is a discussion that everyone, male, female, young, or old, and regardless of position in life, is sure to derive tremendous benefit from. Before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that this podcast is separate from my teaching and research roles at Stanford. It is, however, part of my desire and effort to bring zero cost to consumer information about science and science-related tools to the general public. In keeping with that theme, I'd like to thank the sponsors of today's podcast. Our first sponsor is BetterHelp. BetterHelp offers professional therapy with a licensed therapist carried out entirely online. I've been doing therapy for over 30 years. Initially, I started therapy because, I was required to in order to stay in school. But eventually, I just decided to keep doing it because I found it to be very beneficial. There are essentially three things that great therapy provides. First of all, it provides a rapport with somebody that you can trust and talk about all issues with. Second of all, they can provide support in the form of emotional support or directed guidance. And third, expert therapy can provide useful insights that you wouldn't have otherwise had access to. In fact, I consider doing regular therapy as important as working out one's body in the gym or through cardiovascular exercise. And with BetterHelp, scheduling and doing therapy becomes extremely convenient. They can match you to a therapist that can provide those three things: excellent rapport, support, and insight, and they can do so on a schedule that matches yours. If you'd like to try BetterHelp, go to betterhelp.com/Huberman to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's betterhelp.com/Huberman. Today's episode is also brought to us by Maui Nui venison. Maui Nui venison is the most nutrient-dense and delicious red meat available. I've spoken before on this podcast and with several expert guests on this podcast about the fact that most of us should be seeking to get about 1 gram of quality protein per pound of body weight every day. Not only does that protein provide critical building blocks for things like muscle repair and synthesis, but also for overall metabolism and health. Eating enough quality protein each day is also a terrific way to stave off hunger. One of the key things, however, is to make sure that you're getting enough quality protein without ingesting excess calories. Maui Nui venison has an extremely high quality protein per calorie ratio, such that getting 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight is both easy and doesn't cause you to ingest an excess of calories. Also, Maui Nui venison is absolutely delicious. They have venison steaks, they have ground venison, and they have venison bone broth. I personally like all of those. In fact, I probably eat a Maui Nui venison burger pretty much every day, and occasionally I'll swap that for a Maui Nui steak. And if you're really on the go, they have Maui Nui venison jerky, which has 10 grams of protein per stick at just 55 calories. If you'd like to try Maui Nui venison, you can go to mauinuivenison.com/Huberman to get 20% off your first order. Again, that's mauinuivenison.com/Huberman. Today's episode is also brought to us by 8 Sleep. 8 Sleep makes smart mattress covers with cooling, heating, and sleep tracking capacity. Now, I've spoken many times before on this podcast about the critical need to get sleep, both enough sleep and enough quality sleep. When we do that, everything, our mental health, our physical health, performance in any sports or school, etc., all get better. And when we're not sleeping well or enough, all those things suffer. One of the key things to getting a great night's sleep is that your body temperature actually has to drop by about 1 to 3 degrees in order to fall and stay deeply asleep. And in order to wake up feeling refreshed, your body temperature actually has to increase by about 1 to 3 degrees. One of the best ways to ensure that happens is to control the temperature of your sleeping environment. And with 8 Sleep, it makes it very easy to do that. You program in the temperature that you want at the beginning, middle, and end of the night. You can even divide the temperature for 2 different people if you have 2 different people sleeping in the bed, and it tracks your sleep. It tells you how much slow wave sleep and rapid eye movement sleep you're getting. It really helps you dial in the correct parameters to get the best possible night's sleep for you. I've been sleeping on an 8 Sleep mattress cover for well over 3 years now, and it has completely transformed my sleep for the better. If you'd like to try 8 Sleep, you can go to 8sleep.com/Huberman and save $150 off their Pod 3 cover. 8 Sleep currently ships in the USA, Canada, UK, select countries in the EU, and Australia. Again, that's 8sleep.com/Huberman. And now for my conversation with Coleman Ruiz. Coleman Ruiz, welcome.
Thank you. Very excited to see you.
It's great to have you here. I'm guessing most people are probably not familiar with Coleman Ruiz. So let's start at the beginning. Where were you born? What was the context of your home life? And maybe let's get up to maybe elementary school, middle school, and whatever top contour or deep details you want to get into.
Yeah.
We're all ears.
Okay, I'll bring us up to 7th grade because I would say that was probably the first big inflection point in my life. I was born in New Orleans, in a suburb called New Orleans East, we call it. And I have an older sister, 2 younger brothers. My dad was a welder. My mom was a dental assistant. And we had a couple of boxers and the dogs. And we had a very modest upbringing. I won't over-dramatize it, but admittedly, sometimes we got cheese from the lady across the street who didn't want her welfare cheese, and it was one of those. I could tell my parents were fighting for every nickel. But it was great. I mean, my cousin grew up across the street from me. He's exactly my age. We had that, at least some of my memory, Andrew, of it was very pleasant. I learned later that you forget a lot of things in your childhood that were unpleasant. But my initial memories when I started thinking about this kind of thing, and, as you and I have discussed, getting professional help, and you start to learn a little bit more about your childhood. But I remember it being very pleasant. You've told me about your background in skateboarding and stuff. We skateboarded the neighborhood. BMX was a big thing when we were kids. It was very much a rat the streets upbringing. There was a park behind the neighborhood. We would cut through the fence and go, this kind of thing. I played football and baseball, and very normal in that regard. Went to the neighborhood school, and then in 6th grade, I went to what was my high school, but it went 5th through 12th, called Holy Cross High School in the lower 9th Ward, which that spot is now vacated because the school, I went back after Hurricane Katrina, the whole school had to be moved, and I went there in 7th grade, and it was a hellacious start. I mean, it was detention after detention, fist fight after fist fight, and damn near.
Were you the instigator of those fights?
Probably some. I definitely fell in with the wrong crowd initially in that 6th and 7th grade years. And I wouldn't say it was so extreme that it was complete mayhem, but I was definitely on, problem situation number whatever when my parents were called in, and it was kind of the last straw type thing. Mm-hmm. And I got cut from baseball. My grades were fine. I was always a pretty good student. It was just teenager shenanigans. And then I went out for wrestling.
Can I just pause you for a second? So on the violence part, I have a little bit of experience with this, but violence can come from trying to protect others.
Yeah.
Instigating. It can come from the wildness, just trying to, see what it feels like, experimentation. Mm-hmm. And any number of other things, all the way to pure sociopathy, which we know you are not and weren't. Do you recall feeling something inside that inspired this? Was it for attention? Did it feel good afterwards? Can you recall what it was about?
I think it was the wildness thing, Andrew, honestly. It wasn't, I believe I don't have a malicious bone in my body. We all have that in us. obviously, my profession later in the military, you know, I was able to activate that, and I feel like I still can. And I was certainly able to in sports, which is why that 7th grade year was really pivotal. But even now, it's funny. It's even funny you ask about the wildness because let me put it in movie terms. Like one of my favorite movie scenes of all time is in the movie The Town. When Ben Affleck walks in the room, Jeremy Renner is his partner essentially, and he walks in the room and he says, "We're going to hurt somebody. I can't tell you where and I can't tell you when." And he pauses, and Jeremy Renner takes maybe a 3-second pause, and he says, "Whose car are we taking?" He doesn't even ask. They're just wild and excited about doing something wild. I don't promote like going to hurt somebody, of course.
Sure. Were you the Affleck or the Renner? Or Renner in that?
I was, I feel like I was mostly the Renner. Put it this way: if you have some good idea this afternoon, like let's go fucking try this, I'm good. I'm ready. And I think it's just exciting. I hate rules. I hate being told what to do. It's one of the things that was so frustrating about the military. The rules are in place for a reason. They're written in blood. I get all that. But we're so constrained sometimes. I think that was just all coming into fruition that 7th grade year. And I enjoyed going wild. Like, it was just fun. And frankly, these fist fights and this trouble wasn't like going to get some kid. Those other kids wanted the wildness too, and so, but the school didn't want that. And then I went out for wrestling that year, and I could put it all into the wrestling room, and it was awesome.
Before we talk about wrestling and why it was so meaningful as a channel for you, a little bit of neurobiology, or else I wouldn't be
Great.
Andrew Huberman. There's a really interesting phenomenon that one observes in both animals and humans, which is that somewhere around adolescence, when the hormone surge begins, but even before that, there's a phenomenon called dispersal. It's very different than fighting per se or sexual activity per se. It's a literal dispersal from one's home environment, or in animals, a nest, in which animals and humans, and we're animals after all, start foraging new environments in a very, as you point out, chaotic way. It's not organized. It's a little nuts. And biologists and neurobiologists in particular have observed changes in neural circuitry that drive this. So some of it's hormonal, but a lot of it is the brain taking all this input that one has been exposed to, sun, earth, food, others, social interactions, and starting to essentially throw the different paints, the different colors of paint together and just trying things. Yeah. Some kids are more prone to this than others. Certainly has a hormonal component. Boys and girls tend to do this differently, but they both do it. And psychologists and neurobiologists see this as a fundamental shift in our underlying circuitry. So just a little bit of food for thought to put what you just described in context. With that said, tell us about wrestling.
I mean, Andrew, in many ways, like I said, that was the first inflection point. It was like immediate uptake. Within a week, I knew this was my thing. Maybe the first practice.
What do you think it was?
So when I was younger, my aunt and uncle, when I was like 7 years old, they started taking me to road races. And I'm sure, just running races, 1 mile and 5K races when I was really small kid.
For you to run.
To run with them. They were into the road racing thing back in the day when it was brand new, the 80s. I'm 48, so I was born in 75. So I was 8 years old at the time. And I was into, like, obviously, can I win this race? The pain of the effort was so comfortable. And then, it's kind of silly, but like I won the PT competition at like the Boy Scouts thing in Audubon Park.
PT is physical therapy.
Yeah, physical training.
Physical
training.
Yeah.
And so I won like the whatever when I was young in Boy Scouts or something. And then it just snowballed. Then I was just like the physical activity still today is, if someone said, what are you really in love with? It's that. And so when I walked into the wrestling room, it was so extreme compared to anything else I had ever done. Football, baseball, whatever. I never really liked any of those sports. I played them all, but I didn't like them. And always, my dad wrestled in high school and college. And we were always rough and tumble in that regard. And I even have a couple of buddies in the teams, who obviously were college wrestlers. There's a lot of wrestlers in the teams. And people would always joke about how we're so handsy. Our hands are always on each other. And that was just a thing for us. Like, I loved the close contact. I loved the fight of it. What I really love about combat sports, because I boxed in high school between wrestling seasons, was the respect.
Tell me more about that.
You just don't have – there are some, of course. Like, you can see guys hyping it up and doing their thing in UFC these days, and that's totally fine. But for the most part, if you have fighters of any type, like in a setting when they don't have to do, the stuff for TV and whatnot, they respect each other and they respect the effort, and because you know what it takes and you know how hard it is to face another man in the middle of a mat with no equipment and nowhere to run and no timeouts and no one to tap in. That's extreme, And it may not seem like high school wrestling is extreme, but as you just mentioned, something about, development, when you're 14 and you're facing another, like, that's the first time. Is someone trying to take your life? No, they're not, but it feels that way. And then you go and you put in all these hours of training and you don't eat during the week and you run stadiums or you run levies and, fireman's carries and all of it while you're not eating and making weight and you're in the sauna, and it's just a very tough thing to do, combat sports. And I love the respect that it engenders between the people who do it.
I think it was Sam Sheridan who wrote A Fighter's Heart, an excellent book. And for anyone, male or female, any age, who's interested in the human spirit, I recommend A Fighter's Heart, because it's about the different fight sports, but it's really about the path of self-discovery that occurs in various martial arts. And as you said, like, especially boxing is very gentlemanly. You touch gloves, you start, then the bell goes off, you go to your corner. Like, it's, sometimes people lose it, bite off people's ears and things like that. But for the most part, the sport is very structured. As you were doing this, what was happening with school? Did it help your academic studies? Did it keep them more or less the same? And how did your family and your peer group view what you were doing? Were you considered strange for liking wrestling so much? I mean, you're dieting, right? You're a young male dieting for purpose of sport and performance. You're sitting in saunas, you're running in wrapped in plastic bags, all this. A good friend of ours who was also in the SEAL teams once said to me, he said, wrestlers are different. And I think he meant different in quotes.
I think that's true. School, my grades immediately went up, Andrew. It was like, oh my gosh, the discipline of all of it. My grades were always better in wrestling season than out of wrestling season.
Interesting.
Like, when I was cut loose out of the structure, then it wasn't good. And between 7th and 8th grade and all that, I didn't have any crazy shenanigans going on. I wasn't going to get kicked out of school, whatever. I was doing normal stuff for the age, but...
So the fight stopped?
Totally, because I could put it into the wrestling space, And I think, I grew up, obviously, in New Orleans, and I think, down there, it's baseball, football, basketball. Wrestling is not... I was lucky to wrestle in college at all, because it wasn't like Iowa was looking to recruit me. They have plenty of people to recruit, and they don't need any Louisiana wrestlers. Although Daniel Cormier grew up like north of the lake. He was 4 years younger. I was telling this to somebody. We don't know each other. I'd love to meet him. Super impressive athlete. We heard that, hey, there's some kid up in the North Shore, I think is where he grew up, whooping everybody's ass. And his name's Daniel Cormier, and then, obviously the rest is history. But the sport is not big in Louisiana, which is all to say that we were kind of a unicorn. It was very odd at my high school specifically. We had one coach, his son, either national runner-up, his name was Willie Gatson. Willie passed away. I think his son ended up at Iowa State, and within the last 5 or 6 years was either a national champ or a runner-up. Willie, when I was in 8th grade, Andrew, Willie was at my high school. Like, I have no idea how Willie Gasson ended up in New Orleans, but we ended up with this cluster of wrestlers at that time with the right coaching, and a few kids were going to junior college and coming back and wrestling in college and coming back. And there were 3 or 4 guys, I remember specifically in 8th grade, because I started, at least in the junior high ranks, I started to take off my second year. These guys would abuse me in the wrestling room. They were seniors in high school. I was 112 pounds or 132 pounds my freshman year. And they would just, in my 8th grade year, and they would just abuse me.
Define abuse.
In all the legal, normal wrestling ways. Like, there's wrestling gets broken up, obviously, by weights. You got the heavyweights on one end of the room, the lightweights on the other end of the room, and the young kids stay with the young kids for the most part. And a few of these guys would drag me down to the varsity end, and I would wrestle with the middleweights, and they would beat the shit out of me. And eventually you get to the point where you're like, fuck this, I had enough. And that's when sort of things started to turn. But I think that wrestlers are different, and my peer group, 1 or 2 of my really good friends wrestled, but most of them played other sports. And so, but in every sense of the word, life got better for me because of that sport. It changed my life.
So you wrestled all through high school.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
At that point, were you discovering relationships, girls? Were you partying? Were you a drinker, used drugs?
No drugs. I mean, it's New Orleans, right? It's like one of the things that was tough. I'm glad I got out of the city, frankly, because it was party time outside the season. Yeah, girls, girlfriends, normal stuff in that regard. Lots of drinking, lots of rat in the streets, in those days in the 90s.
But you kept it inside the lane lines. It sounds
totally.
like no drunk driving, no arrests.
Well, we did a little bit of that, but nothing crazy in that regard. Mm-hmm. I think I understood the consequences, and I really cared about my career. I really wanted to wrestle in college. My grades were excellent. My SAT scores, not so much. But I started winning really fast. And, my last 2 years in high school, I was 89-0, and I almost won my sophomore year. So I was runner-up in the state my sophomore year. I always joke with the boys. All my boys are way better athletes than I ever could think about being.
Your sons?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And but in 8th grade, I made varsity, and it was 8th grade? Yeah, and I lost 75% of the matches, but you just grind it out, and it's how I got into the Naval Academy, which is a whole nother story. But
so let's talk about that. So you finish high school.
Mm-hmm.
You head to the Naval Academy. Why the Naval Academy?
There's actually a crazy story behind this, which maybe we'll circle back to. But the summer, gosh, I had forgotten that this started in 7th grade too. The summer between my 7th and 8th grade year, my grandfather was too young to join the Navy, and he wanted to go to the Naval Academy during World War II, and he lied to the recruiter, and he got into the Merchant Marines. I'm pretty sure, first cousin. My uncle and my cousins are like first cousins once removed. My uncle Jim Therrell was at a family reunion in Mississippi, which we were at, and he didn't mention the Naval Academy. Family reunion ends, they all go home. And he starts sending me Naval Academy paraphernalia. I knew nothing about the military. And I just thought about it, and he would send me stuff, we didn't have the internet, right? He's sending these booklets.
Mm-hmm. And you don't like authority.
No.
So I've not been in the military, but I've done some work with y'all. Yeah. And there's a lot of hierarchy and authority.
Yeah, that's true. The truth, Andrew, is it just seemed exciting. I wasn't really thinking about the implications as 18-year-olds, It looked very exciting to me. And having gotten some professional help in the intervening years, what I really think was a big part of it was my parents got divorced my senior year in high school, and the family unit just blew up, right? And so it also represented an escape, get out and go get your life out of the New Orleans and just go do something.
Were you a part of that, that obviously you were part of the family that got divorced. Mm-hmm. Was it chaotic? Was it controlled? You and I are the exact same age. We're both 48, born in 75. Back then it was a lot less common for people they called them broken homes back then.
Yeah, that's right.
Nowadays, I don't think they call it that. Everyone just cites the statistic that, more than half of marriages end in divorce as if perhaps to normalize it, but that's more than half. Do you recall feeling distraught about that, or was it just kind of the natural consequence of something you had observed a long time? You're like, oh, that kind of makes sense. That
No, it was a shock to me. It wasn't a shock to my older sister. I just remember, this was the thought at the time. This is like seared in my brain. This has nothing to do with me. That wasn't like some sophisticated view. It was mostly, fuck this, I'm not dealing with this. I have my own life. They're going to have to do what they're going to do, meaning my parents. I'm getting the hell out of here.
Not a bad mindset for a kid at that stage. If it had been 4 years younger, that might not be the best mindset. But as you're heading off to college, that's a reasonably healthy mindset, as opposed to getting enmeshed in the what happened and this and that. Can I ask you, at that stage, you're 17, 18 years old at that point. Were you journaling at that point?
No.
No journaling, no introspective work.
Zero.
No school psychologist, no thinking about or talking about your feelings. It's wrestling, Naval Academy, social things, school, SATs, like very standard. We're almost like talking like a superficial list of like what happens at the end of high school in 1992.
And Andrew, it's the word superficial, and I carried this forward for years, which I'm sure we'll talk about here in a second. Those binary focus areas, like I was literally just going after them at full steam, stronger, faster, more intensity, with zero introspection, no excavation of the psychology of anything, just full steam ahead, like let's go.
No meditation, no breath work, no.
Zero, which was not adaptive in the long run.
And we'll get to how that played out in the long run, but nonetheless, you got into the Naval Academy.
Well, didn't first.
Okay.
So I applied. I get, my uncle's doing all this stuff. Anyway, I applied and I didn't. I still have the letter, the thanks, but no thanks. You're not qualified.
How'd that hit you?
At the time, it hit me kind of like everything I did when that age, when it didn't work out. Admittedly, Andrew, it was like, there's got to be a way around this. Like shit has to work out. But it feels terrible, right? Like you have a moment of what do we do? And my kids have heard the story a million times. My wife was a blue chip swimming recruit for Navy. And so she was into the Naval Academy when she was at the beginning of her senior year of high school, right?
What's a blue chip?
I mean, my understanding of blue chip is like you are at the very top of the list and the coaches put you straight into the admission cycle saying nobody else gets in until this person does.
So they wanted her, they didn't want you.
Not only was she a blue chip, and I got the no. I guess. Well, the wrestling coach called me a couple of weeks after my no, which is now in May. I'm about to graduate from high school. I'm not accepted anywhere.
You only applied one place.
Actually, two, which you may bust out laughing when I tell you what the other one is, because no internet. I got a mailer in a pamphlet from Stanford, the wrestling coach. I didn't know what Stanford was. I had no idea that the college was even prestigious. I didn't know they had a wrestling team. I filled out the application and wrote the letter thing, and I sent it into Stanford, and of course, never heard back from them. But I applied to two places, Stanford and the U.S. Naval Academy.
Well, for those that follow wrestling.
I didn't get into either.
Right. That's a great story. And I'll just briefly mention that a few years ago, there almost wasn't a wrestling team at Stanford. They had plans to cut the wrestling team, despite having a NCAA champion at Stanford. But the power of people gathering and petitioning works, and wrestling and a few other sports that were being cut from the curriculum were spared.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Or rescued.
So happy to see that.
Yeah. So Stanford does have a wrestling team.
So the coach, back to how I ended up getting in. I appreciated my college coach called and he said, I'm recruiting. I have one more spot at the prep school, which is in Newport, Rhode Island. I'm recruiting another kid from Pennsylvania. If he takes that spot, then I don't have anything left. And we were exploring going to prep school and stuff like that, oblique ways to get in. And he called me sometime in May, like right around graduation, and said, can you be in Newport in July? That kid I think he went to Lehigh. And I went to the prep school.
In Newport, Rhode Island.
Yeah, in Newport for a year.
I've been there. It's a nice place.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
And so you wrestle for you do school. You're in the West Point has a prep school and Colorado Springs has a prep school. And so we joked that my wife was first person in our class accepted and I was last. which is highly possible, actually.
I'd like to take a brief break and acknowledge our sponsor, AG1. By now, most of you have heard me tell my story about how I've been taking AG1 once or twice a day, every day, since 2012. And indeed, that's true. I started taking AG1 and I still take AG1 once or twice a day because it gives me vitamins and minerals that I might not be getting enough of from whole foods that I eat, as well as adaptogens and micronutrients. And those adaptogens and micronutrients are really critical because even though I strive to eat most of my foods from unprocessed or minimally processed whole foods, it's often hard to do so, especially when I'm traveling and especially when I'm busy. So by drinking a packet of AG1 in the morning and oftentimes also again in the afternoon or evening, I'm ensuring that I'm getting everything I need. I'm covering all of my foundational nutritional needs. And I, like so many other people that take AG1 regularly, just report feeling better. And that shouldn't be surprising because it supports gut health. And of course, gut health supports immune system health and brain health. And it's supporting a ton of different cellular and organ processes that all interact with one another. So while certain supplements are really directed towards one specific outcome, like sleeping better or being more alert, AG1 really is foundational nutritional support. It's really designed to support all of the systems of your brain and body that relate to mental health and physical health. If you'd like to try AG1, you can go to drinkag1.com/Huberman to claim a special offer. They'll give you 5 free travel packs with your order, plus a year's supply of vitamin D3 K2. Again, that's drinkag1.com/Huberman. So you're in Newport. Does that have a portal to the Naval Academy?
Yeah, if you graduate prep school, you're straight into the Naval Academy. Like they fully expect you to be there the next year.
When junior year rolled around, and senior year rolled around of high school, didn't anyone pull you aside and say, hey, you might want to like apply to a few other places? You might want to consider what you do if this doesn't work out. What did they assume you were going to do? They just head into the city of New Orleans and bust tables?
Zero guidance, Andrew, really, like from my high school. And I think the ecosystem I was in, like people just didn't really know how to do that. You know, how to apply to schools. I mean, my parents obviously helped when I applied to the Naval Academy, but when I look at the system that kids go through now to go, you know, their process to find the best college experience, I never had one conversation with a guidance counselor about what to do. I just didn't. I mean, I just got very lucky. A few people, my high school wrestling coach intervened, I think at some point, and called the Naval Academy to speak to the coach to say you should give this kid a chance, but they didn't know who he was, you know? I'm so lucky and so fortunate that I ended up where I ended up. It's why I took it so seriously. Like the focus with which I applied my time in high school, I took that to 10x degree when I got to Newport because I knew this was my chance.
There's something magical to that. I can relate to that. So you're in Newport.
Yeah.
And describe what a day was like. Is it all wrestling? You're taking general education classes like one does in the first 2 years of university?
Yep. So the way the prep school is set up for the Naval Academy is they're basically teaching you the first semester of the Naval Academy. So you take calculus, physics, chemistry, I think you take an English class, etc. And you go through like a pretty hellacious first couple of weeks, because you're away from the flagpole where no one can hear you scream. You know, you're up in Newport, you're not in Annapolis where everyone's watching. And you do a couple hellacious weeks for an 18-year-old who's never been in the military before.
So you're in the military, technically, if you go to this
You're
school.
actually enlisted in the Navy.
Okay, so they own you to some extent.
Yeah, they do. Okay. And then you're
wearing uniforms, you're jogging in the morning, you're doing salutes and marching.
The whole nine.
And,
Yep.
Yeah,
and you have
bugling, they're doing taps in the evening.
Yep, all of it.
Got it.
Yep. And there's 300 people at the prep school. It's distributed basically amongst folks coming from the fleet. So guys who did 4 or 5 years in the military somewhere, and they're coming into the Naval Academy from the fleet. And then athletes, and then sort of a mixture of other folks who need a little extra school, right? And then you do a full school year. You're competing. It's basically a redshirt year that's not a redshirt year. I competed up and down the East Coast against, you know, all the other prep schools, and you finish that year in May, and then, you know, you're done with the prep. The prep year is fine. It's a little bit of a shock when you're 18, but it's fine.
Always been curious about these military schools and the people that go to them and what happens to people there. Did you have any sense of patriotism prior to arriving at this prep school? And did that sense of patriotism, I'm talking like love of country, understanding the history of our country and its position in the international landscape. Are you thinking about that stuff? Are they feeding you that? Or is it really like wrestling, get through the march, shower up, go to the next thing? Is it very like plug and chug?
No, the feeding of, and I really appreciated this, the feeding of those concepts starts when you get there. But I was deer in the headlights, and like I didn't think about my life in this way at all when I was headed there. I mean, what you get very early, because the school very quickly starts to bring really high-level accomplished people, colonels, admirals, whatever, generals, to expose you to these people. I do remember sitting there within weeks, like this is way bigger than I thought it was in terms of how serious this situation is, and how serious this ecosystem of people take this. Because my dad wasn't an admiral. He was a welder in New Orleans, I didn't understand the bigness of it.
One of the reasons I ask this is that various times throughout my life, I've had this experience of like seeing people close to me doing incredible work. Like when I was a postdoc at Stanford, I had Nobel Prize was given that one week to the guy next door to me.
Yeah.
So you see him in the morning and like you're hearing it on the radio. And obviously I didn't have that kind of stature or talent in science. I think I'm a good scientist, but good enough to get tenure at Stanford. But then there are levels within the game.
Yeah.
But there is something very special to the experience of having people close to you physically and in the same ecosystem as you described it, achieving amazing things. I also saw this in skateboarding. I mean, there were a lot of, let's just say, failures to integrate with normal life. But there were also some guys that I grew up with who started companies and set world records and had their pro models. And then if you zoom out from that and you go, wait, I'm in this community, it changes one's self-view about what's possible. Totally. So I think that's what you're describing. And I think it's such an important thing for people to experience at some point, even if the goal isn't to be at kind of world scale, for people to realize that the town they grew up in, the family they grew up in, that context can expand.
Yes.
And so do you recall being at this prep school and kind of third personing yourself and thinking like, oh, I'm Coleman Ruiz, I'm from New Orleans, I went from this to this to this, the way you've been describing it, and I'm here, and they're like, I'm around some incredibly impressive people, and I'm here. Like once you make that recognition that you're there, a whole bunch of things can open up.
No, I actually came at it from the opposite way, and this has been a hard thing for me my whole life, and I have to watch out for this perspective, is I felt like every day I had to wake up and earn my place there. I was never good enough for myself ever. So next day up is a restart to prove myself again on whatever standard I'm picking that day, right? Looking back on it, I realize it was somewhat arbitrary because it was just day by day. I didn't think I'm Coleman Ruiz. I made it here. Look, I'm part of this eco. I was afraid, like Mike Tyson talks about being afraid every time. I was afraid every day. And I fought for like a position in this place every day. Now, that was adaptive in some regard, right?
Mm-hmm, very.
Because to me, it was, let's go. Like today's another new day and it's 100% all in, full go. I hope everybody's ready.
Did you ever recall falling asleep at night and thinking like, well, like
I had a good day.
Or I'm scared, they're going to discover I can't keep up or I can't keep up?
All the time.
So a lot of fear. I mean,
yeah,
a lot of fear.
All the time. And some of it I genuinely know and believe, Andrew, that it was well-intentioned. Like I wanted to do a good job for the group, whatever group I was in. My platoon, my squad, in the case of the prep school, that first experience. I was talking about this with my wife the other day, just because stories come up. We had a 25th reunion at the Naval Academy and this kind of thing. And I was a really good runner for my group in high school, like the people I was around. I ran cross country when I was younger. And anyway, I suppose I'm going the other direction. I sort of did have some level of confidence in my ability. And then I got there and like all these college cross country runners are like my son is now, just crushing me. And I think sadly, because it was just sort of in me, that fed my fear. Like, shit, I thought I was better than this. Clearly I suck. I have to get to their level. So I did have a very well-intentioned excitement around just do a good job with the people you're around. There's something fun to that and wild, as we spoke about. But I was operating out of fear for decades.
But there was a I need to get to their level statement in there. It wasn't, I can't keep up. I better find a different path.
No. I knew I could get to their level with enough work,
Was that something that your father or your mother or both had instilled in you that
for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my high school wrestling coach was, let's call it maybe from the old school. Mm-hmm. If you worked hard enough, you could get there.
So this is the essence of growth mindset long before 100%. Carol Dweck coined the phrase growth mindset. Yeah. It's there. I'm not there yet.
When I first read her book, I'm like, when people teach us this shit when we were kids?
Yeah. Well, some of us got it, some of us didn't. And it can be very context dependent, right? I think that's one of the more important and often overlooked aspects of Carol's work and Ali Crumb's work is that we can develop growth mindset in one domain of life, but then another domain of life, we get, kicked in the teeth once and we're like, I can't do that. There's a carve out where I can't function. Some people do that, some people don't. And we don't understand enough about it to understand, whether or not it's a global circuit, and there's a lot of context. But okay, so you're hanging in there at least. You're surrounded by some very impressive people. There's a lot of structure. Yeah. So we're a long way from the pre-wrestling days. This is the opposite of chaos.
Totally.
This is structure.
Yeah, you're told what to do every 5 minutes, more or less.
Mm-hmm. And this is scary feelings. Fear is a scary feeling. Yeah. But you're channeling it. And you said the unit of the day became important. It's like, what can I do today?
Yes.
You're not thinking about the week. You're not thinking about the season. You're not thinking about becoming some war hero down the line. You're just 24 hours. And
do the next day.
Yeah. How was your self-care at that point, or is that built into the system?
It's not built into the system, and it was zero. I mean, it really was, Andrew. Like, it was the old school. We were not doing anything sophisticated back then. Mm-hmm. I mean, we stretched. Mm-hmm. And in the grand scheme of things, this is going to sound weird because there still is a lot of, primal nature to combat sports. But in the grand scheme of things, we were probably on the upper end of sophisticated, like wrestlers jump rope, they stretch, they do aerobics, been in a sauna since 1993. It's like not purposeful, not to cut weight in a garbage bag, but there is some level of balancing out your training, Wrestlers like to swim during the season because you're getting out of that hot room. Like, you end up accidentally doing some of these things, but there was no self-care.
So you eventually go to the Naval Academy.
94.
The actual Naval Academy. And that's where you met your wife.
Yep, in 96, my sophomore year.
So when you get there, what's different than the prep school?
First of all, it's big in the macro, not just geographically big or footprint, square footage-wise. It's big. The concept is big. Like the superintendent of the school is a 3-star admiral. You hear about his career. You're 19 years old. You meet. So there's 2 incredibly important people in my life in those early years at the Naval Academy. A guy named Doug Zembeck, who's dead now, who most people of my service time will know who he is. When I was on my recruiting trip to the Naval Academy and I was in high school, this is complete accident. Doug was a sophomore. We call them youngsters at the Naval Academy. He was a sophomore, and we're the same weight class. So coach matched us up because it was my recruiting visit. And this is back to being wild. Literally my first night on the grounds of the Naval Academy. I'm sleeping on Doug Zembeck's floor of his room with his other 2 roommates. And sometime around 3 or 4 a.m., I get woken up. It's like a bomb goes off. A bomb didn't go off, but there's 12 other gorillas in the room, all wrestlers, maybe 1 or 2 other guys. And Doug is hustling. I don't know any of these people, Andrew. Like, I just met Doug the previous evening. We just flew into town. He wakes me up. He's hustling me to get my shoes on. Again, I'm just this high school kid. And then within 2 to 3 minutes, all 15 of these gorillas bolt out of the room. And Doug grabs me, and I'm just following them, right? So we race out of Bancroft Hall. It's maybe 4 in the morning, 3:30, 4 in the morning. We race out of Bancroft Hall, the barracks. We run across the parking lot into Lejeune Hall. In Lejeune Hall is the swimming facility and the wrestling room. That's it. That's the only thing that's in there, right? The doors, we run up to Lejeune Hall. The doors of Lejeune Hall are locked with a chain on the outside. And one of our, Doug pulls on the chain so that the door is open enough at the top that the 142-pounder can climb up and like get inside that little gap in the doors and run over and open one of the doors that isn't chained.
This is what you'll later do professionally.
I still have, exactly. And what I frankly did as a kid, like back in the day. And so I'm terrified because I don't know what's coming, you know? And so
you don't bother to ask, what are we doing?
there's no time. There's just no time. Like, these guys are, to me, they're full-blown war heroes. They're college kids, but I'm 17. They're 21. All these wrestlers. I'm hoping I'm going to come here and be their teammate, you know? We run into Lejeune Hall, go to the second story. We climb up the utility ladder where Public Works goes to get in the ceiling above the white foamy ceiling tile things. So we're now on the catwalk where the HVAC guys would be working. And I'm starting to get a sense of what's coming. We go a couple feet down the catwalk. Everyone stops. Someone reaches over the catwalk and pulls one chalky ceiling tile out. So now you can look over the edge of the catwalk and see right through the ceiling into the diving well. Remember, the diving well has a 10-meter platform, and then we're another, I don't want to over-exaggerate this, we have to be another 20 feet into the ceiling.
So you're above the diving board. What most people
we're
call
way
it
above the diving board.
Okay.
We're 5 feet above the ceiling, which is 20 feet above the 10-meter.
Got it.
Right? And so, and now I've realized what's happening. And 2 or 3 wrestlers, you climb over the catwalk, get, backwards, get your hands all the way down, and then very lower yourself in a reverse pull-up so you don't kick the ceiling tile. And 3 or 4 guys go, and you can hear them hit the water after what is a terrifyingly long time when you're, my age and
This
scared.
is in the dark?
Oh, yeah. No one's supposed to be in there. And then one of the guys looks over. When you're a recruit, you're called a drag. And they're like, drag, you're up. And I'm lowering myself, Andrew, and I kick the adjacent ceiling tile. And it hits the dive tank, and it turns into pancake batter and goes to the bottom of the pool.
Oh, my.
And one of my teammates is like, you motherfucker. One of my future teammates, he's going nuts. I drop, I live. And this is back to Doug. I come up, Doug clearly goes behind me, but I don't hear him. And 1 or 2 guys are going nuts. You high school piece of shit. Like, you're going to go down to the 15 feet and pick it all up. And Doug comes up and he just blasts everybody. He's our responsibility. This is not his fault. We brought him here. Like, just totally backs me up. And then the rest of the visit happens. I end up there. Doug's now a senior. I'm a freshman. And he's just the legend. He was All-American. And to this day, Andrew, you need to hear this loud and clear. Like, for all the people you and I both know and the people I've been around, no other human in my life have I met with his physical and mental toughness, not even close. The guy was born in the wrong century, is the way I describe him. And he was like my mentor, and he was my guy, and he was killed in 2007.
Marine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll talk about Doug. You've written about him.
Yeah, he's unbelievable.
So I feel like I know him a little bit, thanks to you. We'll get around to that for sure. I think people are getting a sense of where we're headed.
So that's to answer your question about the bigness of the Naval Academy, that's how it started for me. Like, everything was just on steroids. All these kind of people.
I get the impression, at least up until now, that you're kind of you just go with what's right in front of you.
100%.
Like there isn't a lot of pause and reflect. Although your
Certainly not at this
rudder
stage.
your rudder is not haphazard. It's not random.
No.
Well, yeah, I can say right now, you and I are as similar as we may be in certain respects. Like we're very different in this way. Like there isn't like a foraging. In biology we call them random walks. A lot of organization that comes out of biology is through random walks. Like animal or human, like finds a node and moves. And life is like this. Steve Jobs talked about not being able to connect the dots, except in retrospect, and I subscribe to that. And his life was a bit of a random walk, but that we're guided by some central beam of uniqueness. Robert Greene when he was on the podcast talks about that.
Great.
Your beam is more narrow, it seems.
Very narrow.
And the propeller behind that beam is high RPM.
Yes.
That's very clear. And what I'm not hearing here is like, at one point I paused and wondered whether or not I wanted to, be here wrestling in the Naval Academy, or even like what I might do when I get out. Am I going to work for an investment firm? What am I going to do? Your horizon, it seems to be about 24 hours. At that point.
Yeah, I hope not anymore, but at that point.
No, at that point.
Absolutely.
At that point.
I mean,
I'm no psychologist, but it just seems like you're. It's not like you're playing checkers, but you're optimizing for a fairly short horizon.
There's no question that's right. And the other part that was probably the most important to me, Andrew, was the person or the group, because this is going to sound very arrogant, but when I'm going to this prep school, I'm going to the Naval Academy. I think on day one, I'm going to literally meet the cream of the crop in the country. And that was not the case. And it was not the case at the Naval Academy. And frankly, it wasn't the case in the teams either. Like, I'm not saying I'm better than anybody, but I thought every single person when I got to the Naval Academy was going to be entirely focused on whatever our mission was. And I didn't even know what my mission was there, right? I just knew I was going to be told what right looks like. And Doug, not only did I meet him in high school and have the luck of having him as a teammate and a mentor, for me, he is what right looked like. So a focused beam and a propeller running at high RPM with the right, quote unquote swim buddy, so to speak, was literally all I cared about. That was it. Everything else was white noise.
Were there other interests at the time? I mean, presumably you listened to music every once in a while, but
I would, whatever.
But didn't fall in love with it. Didn't feel the need to pursue anything else, learn an instrument, do anything else. That was it. It was that narrow beam. So you met your wife in 96?
Sophomore year at the Naval Academy, yeah.
And was she as driven? Is she as driven? I mean, she's obviously a very talented swimmer. Presumably works hard as well. It's kind of interesting. I didn't realize until a few years ago that the both of you were, military.
Yeah, she definitely just different driven, way smarter, way more. It's obviously not one-to-one for men and women, but way more successful by gradient standards. She's in the Navy Hall of Fame. She was Patriot League swimming champ. She was on junior national triathlon team when she was 20, I think. Really talented in every regard. Ninth in our class, I think. First female graduate, number one female graduate, our class.
Tell me more about that. How's that work?
I don't even know exactly how the grading, first of all, her grades her academic success is just remarkable. And then you get a military grade and you get a physical grade, not for your athletics, I don't think, but it's like your PRT scores, which is your physical readiness test, all this military stuff you do. You get this other cluster of a grade that goes along with your academic grades. And she was number 9 in the class and the first female graduate based on that cluster of grading. And she's an amazing person.
Was her success in academics and swimming, was that part of what drew you to her? No.
No, she was just nice, and I didn't really care about the achievement. It certainly sounds like I care about achievement because of the narrow focus, but it wasn't really that. She was just really normal in a group of a lot of abnormal people, frankly. Like, there's some kooks at these schools, and I'm probably in that category. I don't know, but everybody's just really different there. You have this athlete group. Andrew, you went to Stanford. I mean, some of the group of Naval Academy and West Point, like these schools who produce like the Rhodes Scholar level person, like that cluster of group, like at Navy, I remember they're super impressive. I mean, and then there's the rest of us like doing our best, getting pretty good grades and stuff, but there's very different groups inside, the school.
Yeah. I looked at some of my colleagues, like a former guest on this podcast, Allie Crum. She's incredible scientist, was a Division I gymnast, and is a licensed clinical psychologist. Yeah. Also maintains a healthy relationship with children in the home. Like, I just go, who are these people? Every once in a while we talk about the person with the quote unquote extra gear. Like some people just seem to have that extra gear, and I don't want to take anything away from Allie or anyone else's incredible work ethic that goes with what people perceive as an extra gear. Who knows if they have an extra gear or not? I always just want to know what their parents did.
Yeah.
And it turns out Allie's parents, I hope I have this right, but recollection of this is that her mother ran a theater group and her father was a martial arts teacher.
Okay.
So, there's nothing that speaks to academics per se. And I find that really important to me and to highlight, because I think people hearing this conversation and hear about people like Allie's and other examples like that, they think, oh yeah, you got to come from an academic family to end up at a top tier institution or to win a Nobel Prize. And in fact, there are so many exceptions to that. Or you have to be a natural athlete or be born with some genetic gift or some extra gear, as it were, in order to succeed. But I think so much of success is the thing that you seem to operationalize really quickly, which is to really focus on that 24-hour horizon and where one has seen failure to just keep going. I mean, a big part of it is just to keep going, but also to make sure that you're continuing to go in a direction that is adaptive and functional. Because imagine had you not found wrestling and you had gotten into some group where the metrics of success were around, dealing weed or doing something which back then was highly illegal, now is very varying levels of legality. But where the points came back for effort in domains of life that could take you down into the gutter. And you see this. So I'm convinced that the work ethic is the fundamental piece, but there has to be that rudder. And your rudder has to be pointed in the right direction. So along those lines, you meet Bridget.
Yeah.
And was it instantaneous?
No, we kind of had a friendship first. I felt like, at least, we've discussed this. I mean, I instantaneously enjoyed her company. So I met Bridget in February of sophomore year. I was on the campus of Naval Academy. It's called the Yard. I was on the Yard all winter because the wrestling season is in the shittiest time ever, right? It crosses over the holidays. You have to make weight during Thanksgiving. You have to make weight during Christmas. We were on campus, on the Yard, and it was easily waist-deep snow, and we were doing 2-a-day practices. Everybody else is home on vacation. That winter, I considered leaving, and thank goodness for no cell phones and stuff, because I didn't know how to leave. It was like...
You consider leaving the Naval Academy?
I was just... But it didn't have anything to do with the Naval Academy, really. It had everything to do with that moment. I was miserable. Like, I wrestled 190 my freshman year, and Doug graduated. He was the 177-pounder. So sophomore year, I dropped into his spot. I went down to 177. Fighting weight for me is like 193. But, back then, Andrew, I'm lifting a lot. I was 210 to 215 in the off season, and I cut to 177 sophomore year. And I was just generally miserable. And if it was easy to leave, I probably would have. And then I met Bridget in February, and I was like, fuck it, I'll stay. She's better than this place anyway.
Having followed my high school girlfriend off to college and not gone to college when I got there, I just lived in the parking lot outside her dorm room. I can relate. There's I probably wouldn't be sitting here today were it not for Eleni. I'd like to take a quick break and acknowledge one of our sponsors, Plunge. Plunge makes what I believe is the best self-cooling cold water plunge. Over the last decade, and especially in the last 5 years, there's been an increasing amount of excitement about cold water plunging for sake of mental health, physical health, and performance. And that's in large part because one of the most robust effects of cold water exposure are big increases in adrenaline, also called epinephrine, and dopamine. So while some people do cold water plunging in pursuit of increasing metabolism or reducing inflammation, it's really those big increases in adrenaline and dopamine that lead to those long-lasting increases in alertness and feelings of well-being, not just in the seconds or minutes after the cold plunge, but indeed for several hours afterwards. I've been using a plunge for several years now, typically first thing in the morning or after cardiovascular training. I do agree that doing cold water plunging after a workout designed to generate hypertrophy or strength gains is not a good idea, but doing cold plunging at the other times of day can be tremendous.
Now, in Alzheimer's disease, as an example, we really talk a lot about the degeneration of basal forebrain cholinergic neurons that are leading to the cognitive deficits in Alzheimer's disease. But it turns out that there is also some degeneration throughout other areas of the brain, including the retina. And since we have such a relatively easy time imaging the retina, you can go into your doctor's office and get a quick little sort of laser scan of the retina, a picture of the retina, compared to like going through a full MRI process for your brain. And we can detect the degeneration of the retina and optic nerve associated with Alzheimer's disease. It looks like the same thing is happening in Parkinson's disease and MS. Now, one of the issues is that in a lot of these degenerative diseases, we're able to detect the difference in the retina, but we're not necessarily able to say, hey, if we see this in the retina, it's multiple sclerosis, but if we see that in the retina, it's Alzheimer's disease. So there may be good sensitivity to detecting the disease and to following whether your brain disease is getting worse. But there may not be very good specificity differentiating the different diseases. And I say that with a very big asterisk at the end of that sentence, because there's actually amazingly cool new data. One of our colleagues who you know, Alf Dubra, has helped revolutionize a new way of imaging the retina that's giving us now cellular resolution and even subcellular resolution, seeing things smaller than the sizes of cells inside our retina. And recently, in one of his projects, he's teamed up with another one of our faculty, Heather Moss. She's a neuro-ophthalmologist, so she really specializes clinically in the eye-brain connection, and her research focuses on that. And together, they made actually an amazing recent discovery of very specialized, unusual, novel structures that they can detect in the retina of patients with multiple sclerosis. And whether these kinds of discoveries or other similar kinds of discoveries are going to lead to kind of a whole new generation of biomarkers, which are ways of measuring disease, diagnosing who has the disease, figuring out who's getting worse from the disease, figuring out who's responding to therapies that we're trying to use to treat the diseases. This is a very exciting area, and this really touches on what we're all hoping is the future of eye care as well as the rest of medicine. And that's precision medicine, but also what we call precision health. We really want to not just figure out what drug treatment to give this patient versus that treatment, but we really want to figure out who's at risk of even getting some of these diseases. And gosh, we could intervene now and prevent them from ever getting in trouble in the future.
Fantastic. Can't wait to hear more about those developments. And listen, I want to say, on behalf of the listeners and myself, just thank you ever so much for the discussion today. I don't think I can ever recall a conversation that's included so much basic science and clinical science, and also so many actionable recommendations, both do's and don'ts, as it relates to something so critical as eye health. I also was just reflecting for a moment about the fact that I think you and I met 20 years ago when you were a graduate student. By the way, folks, Jeff is sort of the Kobe Bryant of sorts, although fortunately still with us, in the sense that he went directly from his MD and PhD, skipped his postdoc, didn't require one, directly to being a faculty member. Most people don't do that. They do a 5-year postdoc in between. And then I believe he's going to tell me all the places I'm wrong. And I should just come clean that Jeff is my chair of department at Stanford School of Medicine, Department of Ophthalmology. So for me, I see this as a particularly warming, but also at once unpredictable, but pure pleasure of an experience to get to learn so much from you, because I don't think we've had this long to sit down and talk science in a very long time. So thank you for doing that for my own sake. Thank you for teaching us so much about how to take care of our eye health. And now you can tell me where my history is wrong and maybe my hippocampus is degenerating.
No, it's been a pleasure over the years. I have nothing but the warmest memories of you as a postdoc and me as a graduate student getting to be, nerds in the laboratory 20 years ago at Stanford in the lab of Ben Barris, and very warm, wonderful feelings about, learning science and how to do science and making real advances even at that time. And then the fact that we've had the chance to cross paths in San Diego, again at Stanford, collaborate on important projects having to do with, developing new ways of measuring diseases, developing new ways of treating diseases. The idea that we're going to actually bring forward some of the advances that our lab, that your lab, that other people's labs have been making in neuroprotection in diseases like glaucoma and macular degeneration, in regeneration of the optic nerve, of the retina. We're real close on a lot of those. This is a major topic of really the cutting edge research that we're really trying to keep pushing forward because we know it's so important to patients. I often joke, my mother had a sign outside the bathroom and it said, "Remember, how long a minute is depends on what side of the door you're on." And I really appreciate that, as fast as we're trying to go with our research and moving that into clinical research, which I think we're doing very effectively in the department, really working on vision restoration research in the department. I appreciate that as fast as we think we're going, it's not fast enough for so many patients who are suffering from these diseases. So thanks very much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure reconnecting over these many important topics. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you.
Well, delighted to do it and looking forward to doing it again. You're an amazing colleague, friend, clinician, and now public health educator. Thank you. Thank you for joining me for today's discussion all about eye and vision health with Dr. Jeffrey Goldberg. I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. If you're learning from and or enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's a terrific zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and Apple. And on both Spotify and Apple, you can leave us up to a 5-star review. Please also check out the sponsors mentioned at the beginning and throughout today's episode. That's the best way to support this podcast. In addition, if you have questions for me or comments about the podcast, or you'd like to suggest a guest that I feature on the Huberman Lab podcast, please put those in the comment section on YouTube. I do read all the comments. During today's discussion and on many previous episodes of the Huberman Lab podcast, we discuss supplements. While supplements aren't necessary for everybody, many people derive tremendous benefit from them for things like improving sleep, for hormone support, and for improving focus. The Huberman Lab podcast is partnered with Momentous Supplements. If you'd like to see the supplements discussed on the Huberman Lab podcast, you can go to Live Momentous, spelled O-U-S, so livemomentous.com/Huberman. If you're not already following me on social media, it is Huberman Lab on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. In all those places, I discuss science and science-related tools, some of which overlap with the content of the Huberman Lab podcast, but much of which is distinct from the content on the Huberman Lab podcast. So again, it's Huberman Lab on all social media platforms. If you haven't already signed up for the Huberman Lab podcast Neural Network newsletter, it is a zero-cost monthly newsletter that includes podcast summaries as well as protocols comprised of short PDFs that include everything from a toolkit for sleep, a toolkit for neuroplasticity or learning, toolkits for enhancing exercise, toolkits for enhancing various aspects of mental health, physical health, and performance. Again, all zero cost and all available to you simply by going to hubermanlab.com, go to the menu, scroll down to newsletter, and provide your email. We do not share your email with anybody. And again, it's the Neural Network newsletter, and it is completely zero cost. Thank you once again for joining me for today's discussion with Dr. Jeffrey Goldberg. And last but certainly not least,